everybody, welcome back. Well, where we last left off, I had finished the tail molds, and since then I was able to flip the plug on its side. You can see that I've got some sawhorses here with some foam. Not really a cradle, it's more like just foam padding under there. Best I can tell, the plug weighs, I'm gonna guess around 200 pounds. So it's not, not super light, but it's not crazy heavy either. So I was able to, you can still see in the front here, this is the tube that goes through here to keep the plug straight, but I've just got a metal closet rod in there so that I can lift this. But I set that closet rod onto one of these sawhorses and then left the tail in this other cradle that I had built here. So this is what it had been sitting on. And I was able to lift it by myself just from the tail and then rotate it over and get it into this position here. Stab mold is resting on the ground there on that wood block, so it's nice and steady. So I can work on it. It's not going anywhere. And in the meantime, I did have to do a little bit of body work right here. This is where the fuselage plug was sitting in that stand, and it had been sitting in that position for, gosh, probably more than a year. And the foam pipe insulation that I have in here, it just broke down, so it was essentially resting on right on this wood, so it made a couple small dents there, but no big deal. The way I do plugs, they're easy to repair, so I don't go through the trouble of completely painting the plug and finishing it like you would a show car. I've just really found that's not necessary for my methods. So anyway, did a little body work there, and then the rest of it I just sanded down to 2000 grit and polished it just like you would color sand a car. Most of the plug had been molded before, so the really only things that I haven't molded yet are the left and right fuselage halves. So I've already pulled a canopy mold, I've already pulled upper and lower cowl molds. So a good portion of all of this was already sanded and polished, so it really wasn't a whole lot of work. Basically just sanded the whole thing down. There were a couple spots that needed a little bit of filling, a few pinholes and things like that, but nothing major. So I sanded it down to 2000 grit and polished it to preparing to put on the splitter plates. So what you see here, I went and marked the center line of the plug right here, and I did this while it was still upside down. I have a laser level right there, and I set it up in front and shot a laser line down from the center of the spinner ring all the way down through the tail, so to get it absolutely dead center. In reality, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be exactly in the center. Where you would run into problems with it not being centered is if you had a negative draft angle where the part would lock in the mold. So if there's a negative draft, you can't get the part out, but this is big and curvy and there's none of that. So at any rate, I still want to make it as good as I can. So this tape here is just an area where I can bond the splitter plate to the plug on top of the tape and not directly to the splitter. That helps prevent any damage from removing the splitter plates. And what I normally do is I hot glue the splitter, so there'll be more sections that get not only supports for the splitter plates, but also the splitter plate itself will be bonded right to it. So this is just a start. There'll be lots more tape here, but I find that comes off really easily when I do it that way. The splitter plates, you can kind of see them in the background here. So these are all CNC'd out of melamine, which is it's MDF with a somewhat smooth surface on it, laminate. And this stuff is pretty nice because you can pretty much just wax it and release it and it'll create a pretty nice splitter plate. You can sand it and polish it, but the fences for the splitter really don't need to be that smooth. They just need to release from the surface. So this saves me a ton of work. When the plug was machined, Eric, my machinist, he was kind enough to, from the same CAD, cut me all these splitter plates out of a sheet of plywood. So that's going to save me a ton of time. Now, one thing you'll notice here is that the splitter goes over the top of the tail where the V-tail is. Now originally, the idea for this is I was going to have a plug-in V-tail system. So I was going to build one single mold, either a left half or a right half, build the tails since they have a symmetrical airfoil on them. I could build two and they would just plug in, kind of like a high-end model sailplane. If any of you fly RC sailplanes, you know the nice stuff has plug-in tails on it. Well, it turns out that was going to be really more trouble than it's worth, because one, I've got to make a joiner system in here. The tails have to plug in. Alignment was going to be a little trickier, and it was for sure going to be heavier. So the more I thought about it, the more I realized that if I built the tail in one piece, not only would it be lighter and stronger, but it would be quicker and much less hassle. You'll also notice that this is where the tail wheel is going to sit in here, in this kind of a tail closeout thing. The splitter is going to get cut, you know, somewhere in here, because I've already made a mold for this. In fact, it's sitting right over here. And what I want to happen is I want to mold it so that when this mold is on here, let me slide it on here real quick, that the fuselage mold stops here and then continues around. So this will become essentially the fence for the aft end of the mold there. So I've got to cut that splitter and fit it up there. I'll go through the process of how I make my splitters as I'm doing it. It's a little bit unique. Well, maybe not. I think a lot of people probably do it this way, but it's cut close, but it's not an exact fit. And what I do is, once I get all the supports made where the splitter can sit there and made up against the plug, I fill that gap with Bondo. And since the plug already has a few coats of wax on it, the Bondo releases very easily. And then once the Bondo's off, I will take and sand the Bondo flush with the top surface of the splitter plate. And that provides absolutely dead nuts, watertight seal to the plug. And if there are any gaps, I use a little bit of filleting wax and I'll fill that in. But in the end, it just makes it a little bit easier, you know, to do a large piece like this. Typically with model airplanes, you'll have a splitter plate that goes essentially all the way around in one piece, and you can kind of cut it and fit it, and then you push the fuselage plug in place into the Bondo, and it kind of, you know, finds its own level. Not really practical here. It's just far too large, so I do it in several pieces. So I'm gonna get going on that, and I guess I'll show you the progress as we go. All right, we're progressing along with fitting the splitter plates. And as you can see, I'm not using the melamine splitters anymore. It turns out those are really heavy. And I was having trouble keeping them on the plug. Originally, I had just put these little foam pieces directly on the plug and was hanging the splitter, you know, on that. You can see I've added a bunch of vertical supports directly to the floor of the shop. And that's just because the weight of the splitter was kind of unmanageable. It was pulling the supports off. It wasn't very secure, and it kind of made handling a bit of a problem too. I have to, you know, again, pull these off, sand them to fit, put them back on multiple times. So in doing that, I just realized that was kind of a waste of time, and I just go back to my old method of using this 1/8 inch hardboard. So what I've done is taken the CAD and just basically made a drawing, a 6-inch wide drawing that follows the bottom contour of the fuselage, and then I cut them out of my laser cutter, and they're not perfect, but you can see the fit is actually pretty good. So this little tiny gap here will get filled with Bondo right up against the plug. I'm doing it in 4-foot sections, so each little piece here is 4 feet, which makes it a little easier to handle. And again, I'm doing this by myself, so just easier to get off the plug and to work, and don't have to hassle with the physical weight of the 3/4 melamine. So this is working out fine. This is exactly how I built the rest of the molds for the rest of all the other parts I did. So I know it works. It just took me a while to come to the conclusion that I needed to go back to what I knew best. The other thing that I've done is this tail closeout mold is actually, I fixed it to the plug here, but it's back a little ways, where this line here is actually where the part will end. But I've left it a little bit long here because I'm going to put what we call a dropout in the mold. That'll create a little step so that when I put this part out of this mold to the fuselage, there'll be a joggle, right here around it. So that'll fit up there nice and flush. Just saves me a little work down the road to try to get that to fit. So anyway, I've got all these on here. They all fit nicely. I do have to make one more small one to bridge this little part right here. Relatively easy, not too worried about that. But they line up real nice, so I'm going to start applying the Bondo to these gaps and sanding that. So I'll show you how that goes. Okay, so here's the first splitter up on the bench, and what I've done is I've sanded the very edge of the splitter at a very slight angle, maybe 10 or 15 degrees. Maybe you can see that there. All that does is, one, it removes the char from the laser so the Bondo will stick a little better. And two, it provides a little bit of thickness where it's very tight up against the plug. Having that kind of a gap there will let the Bondo stick better and give me a little bit of base to sand to. And then I also just put a line of tape down here, and that's just to save me from scratching up the surface of this when I come back and sand this Bondo flush. So the next step here is I'm going to put the splitter back on the plug, and then I'm going to apply Bondo in place. And once that cures, I will pop it off and begin the sanding process. All right, so here you can see I've applied the Bondo. I don't use Bondo, I use a lightweight filler glazing putty. It's a little bit thinner than Bondo and will self-level slightly, so I like to use it for small stuff. It sands easier as well. And that's really it. So all I do is I mix it up here and I put it into a baggie, and you pipe it in just like you're doing, frosting a cake or something like that. So it just takes a couple of minutes to harden, and then I can pop that off of there and sand it flush. So this is the putty that I use, the 3M Platinum Plus finishing glaze. Anything like this, it's a glazing putty, will be just fine. But I tend to use higher quality materials. That's really left over from my days, working as a car painter. I found that, you get what you pay for when it comes to products. So I generally don't skimp there. I will skimp on other methods and procedures and things like that to get my desired result. But I like using good stuff. So I buy expensive sandpaper. I use expensive tape, and expensive primer and materials and things like that. So gonna let this harden up for a few more minutes, and then we're gonna pop it off of there and we'll start sanding it. Okay, this is all cured up now, and I've actually already popped it loose, but you can see that the Bondo stays on the edge of the splitter board, and there's a little bit left over there, but that'll just pop right off. I could probably actually just take my thumbnail. Let's see if I can do this without dropping this. And you can see that just comes right off. So nothing sticks to the plug, which is great. And if I can set this back in place, you can see it goes right back where it's supposed to, and there's zero gap there. So now I'm going to sand this back and then put it back in place. And if there are no voids, that will be able to be bonded to the plug in its final position. All right, I've got this sanded back now. I'm just using a simple foam block with 80 grit. I'm sorry, that's 150 grit. And you can see I just sand it back flush with the tape, so it just starts to catch the tape. And so now I'll peel the tape up. That's going to leave just a little bit of a ridge, the thickness of the tape. And then I'll lightly sand that as well. And then those 150 grit scratches will get filled with wax and the PVA mold release. So they'll be smooth as silk and release just fine. All right, so that's final sanded and set in place. And it's not bonded in yet, but you can see, look how tight that gap is. That is not a gap, that's actually a Sharpie mark right there, but the rest of it is perfectly tight, so I won't need to seal anything. So I'm gonna go ahead and bond it to the plug with hot glue, and then I'll move down to the next one. Okay, all the splitter boards are fit now, so you can see that got a nice tight gap all the way. I do have to fill this little spot right here. I haven't done that yet. But I've also filled all the seams between the boards. So that's all done. That seam's done. It's a nice tight fit all the way down here. Now the only thing I have to do here is there's a little bit of a gap right here. And I'll just fill that with filleting wax. you know, it's a semi-permanent thing. It's real easy to do, and it's great for small stuff like that. So the bottom is basically done. And I'll do the filleting wax after I clean it up a little bit and right before I get ready to mold. I don't generally leave the filleting wax in for more than a few days. It gets a little bit, I don't know, kind of stale, maybe brittle, something like that. So move around to this side, and I'm working on marking the center line of this side. So a little more complicated because when I had the plug upside down before, I obviously couldn't mark the top side where the center goes. So I've marked off around the canopy where I'm gonna mold up to in the front of the cowling. And let me go turn the light off here because I have the laser set up. This is something I just kind of discovered. I didn't figure this out, but you can see the laser light shining there. And what's interesting is the laser is a level, and normally it just, you know, no matter how you have the tripod set up or whatever, it finds its own level. But I've figured out that if you tilt it far enough, it reaches its mechanical limits, and you can actually get it to project off level. So that's why it's blinking. It's telling me that it's not level, but that's okay for what I'm doing. And so what I've done here is I've marked, there's a piece of tape here. That's the center of the cowling. And then all the way back here is the center of the V-tail. Oh, I'm blocking the beam, there we go. And so what I did is just basically tilted the laser until it was at the right angle between those 2 points, and then raised and lowered it until it was exactly in the center. So now I'm just gonna run a piece of tape down there, and that'll be my line where I'm gonna project the splitter plates with a piece of tape. I'll put a piece of tape on top of the line, then I'll raise the splitter plates. They're just touching the bottom of the line, and that's how I know where the center of the mold is. So turn the lights back on and we'll get going on that. All right, so I've marked that line from the laser with a piece of tape there. So the bottom side of the line is what I'm gonna set the splitter plate to. So that worked out really well. I'm pretty happy with that. I had guessed earlier, and I don't know if you can see here, but there's a Sharpie mark right here. That's where I had guessed. So you can see I was off a little bit, and I'm glad I double checked it because that's better. It's not a huge problem if it's off center. It doesn't really affect anything except the split line obviously will not be in the center, but this part is big and round enough that it wouldn't part lock or, you know, cause any issues or whatever. All right, so right now I'm getting ready to cut the splitter plates. So here's what I've got on the computer. This is just the outline of the fuselage, and I cut a section through the middle of the fuselage to give me this outline here. And then these 3 splitter plates are what I've measured out that I need to make. So I took those measurements right off the plug. The splitter plates are a little bit longer than I need them to be, obviously, which is fine, just gives me a little room to play with. This red square up here, that's the size of the material that I'm gonna be using. So it's a 2 foot by 4 foot piece of 1/8 hardboard. This is my laser cutter here, so you can see I've got the wood on there. So basically what I'll do is I'll take each one of these little splitter plates and I arrange them on this confines of this board to make sure I'm not going to cut outside the edges of it. And then let me close this drawing, and that's right. So there's what I'm going to cut. And actually that's not what I'm going to cut. Those are the bottom ones. There you go. There's the top ones. So I'm going to cut those 3 out, and they should fit relatively close, and I can start fitting them to the top. So give me a few minutes here. I'm going to fire up the laser and we'll get cutting on those. All right, sorry if that's a little bit loud. I've got the laser set up and ready to run. So what you're listening to is there's an air ejection system that comes out the nozzle and blows air down through the kerf to clear out any burnt material. And then just a blower there at the bottom. This provides vacuum to the table, so you can see this part is held down tight, just keeps everything flat. And the air compressor is full, so I'm not going to turn that on, so hopefully it won't make a whole bunch of noise. So you can see this here. Got the top splitter in here, so all they're going to do is hit the go button, and there she goes. Start cutting. So this really makes splitter making much easier. Normally it's a pretty tedious thing. Still is tedious, but at least this makes it tolerable. So this is how I do it for all my models and things like that as well. So it really works out pretty well. So it's going to take a few minutes to cut, and we'll check back in when it's done cutting. All right, I put some tape on the plug. That's just to basically protect the plug where I put hot glue to hold the splitter plate on, and then I also bond these stanchions to the floor and then to the plug so they don't move around. But I wanted to show you why I like this method so well. All right, so I just fit up the splitter plate there. Look at that. Nearly a perfect fit right off the laser. Didn't have to do anything. So that just makes my job a little bit easier. Basically one little round of filler, and then I can pop them off, sand them, and they're good to go. So we're gonna keep cranking here and see how far we can get. Morning, everybody. It's now a few days later, and I've got all the top side splitter plates in place. That went pretty quickly because obviously it's less area, but I was also a little more motivated, I guess. I tend to work in waves like that. I'll go like crazy for a few days, then I'll take a couple days off. It's just how I have to do it. But so I've got 2 coats of wax on the plug right now. I just got finished buffing. You can see how nice and smooth it all is. So I'm gonna put one more on, and then we'll be ready to mold. I did make one small change over here. I ended up removing that lower tail closeout mold that I had here. After thinking about it, I realized that having that mold there meant that I had 2 extra lips that I had to mold. And that just makes laying it up more of a pain in the butt. And there's no reason that the flange just can't be straight. So it doesn't have to be vertical like it would have been had it made it up to that other mold. So it just makes my life a whole lot easier. It's easier to cut the cloth. It's easier to lay it up. Corners with carbon can be challenging because it's so stiff. So this just makes the whole thing a lot easier. So one more coat of wax. I've got everything taped off where I don't want to mold. And then let's see, today is Saturday morning. So I'm going to spray PVA on tonight, and then I've got about 6 people showing up tomorrow, and we're gonna mold this thing. So hopefully by tomorrow afternoon, the left half fuselage mold will be complete. And then it's got to sit for, 4 or 5 days, maybe even a little bit longer, before I can flip it and start prepping the other side to do the same thing. Now, the nice thing about the other side is I won't have to add splitter plates, because when we make this mold, this flange will create the other splitter plate. So these splitter plates get completely pulled off, and the other half of the mold becomes a splitter plate. So a little bit quicker to mold the other side. So there she is. Wish us luck. All right, I got the PVA sprayed on last night. See, that lays down super nice. No issues there. And it's super early in the morning, and today's molding day, so I got some friends coming over to give me a hand. So what I'm going to do right now is try to get the gel coat on before they get here. So I put 2 coats of gel coat on, and it's got to get tacky in between coats, and then it's got to be print free before we start laying down the carbon. That takes a few hours, so I'm trying to get ahead of it, so by the time everyone gets here, we can just get right to laying the carbon on, and hopefully get this laid up in a few hours. So here we go. I'll check back in a little bit. All right, first layer of gel coat is on. And man, that's a big job for one person. You can see I didn't get it super smooth in a few places, but that's fine. Another layer is going to go on top of that. And then once that tacks up, we'll start with surface cloth, which is just a 6-ounce S-glass single layer, and then start piling on the carbon after that. So stay tuned.